The snow was coming in sideways when Cal Becker pulled into the town of Bitter Ridge, Colorado. Wind howled against the windshield like something alive, and the wipers groaned under the weight of slush. He shut off the engine, grabbed his coat from the passenger seat, and opened the door. The cold bit deep. Shadow leapt down beside him, his paws silent in the snow, his coat a thick gray that matched the storm clouds above. They walked the last block to the courthouse annex, boots crunching, wind tearing through Cal's flannel. Shadow stayed tight to his leg, his breath steaming in the cold. The town looked like it had been asleep for 100 years. No lights in the shops, no people on the sidewalks. Just the sound of the storm and the ticking in Cal's chest he'd learned to stop fearing years ago. Inside, the air was warm, but smelled of damp coats, stale coffee, and something older, paper and time. A small group had gathered, huddled like birds against the wind. Farmers, locals. One man in a sheriff's jacket sat in the back, arms crossed, watching everyone without blinking. Cal took a seat near the wall, Shadow lying beside him, head on his paws. He barely moved, but his eyes missed nothing. The auction was already underway. Items rattled off, a seized pickup, some welding tools, a foreclosed cabin up near the old ridge trail. Nothing Cal wanted, not until they reached the last lot. Next up, the auctioneer mumbled, "Parcel number 19B, locally referred to as the Avery cabin. Structure condition, poor. One well, no known plumbing or power. 15 years of unpaid property taxes." A hush fell over the room. 15 years. The man repeated, his voice flatter now. "We'll start the bidding at $500. No one moved, not a cough, not a whisper. Cal raised his hand. 500 from the gentleman in the back. The auctioneer nodded, suddenly eager to finish. "Do I hear 6? Still silence. But this time it wasn't apathy. It was fear. Cal felt it before he saw it. The sideways glances, the sudden interest in boots and floor tiles. Shadow shifted beside him, ears twitching, body alert. Going once, going twice. Sold to the gentleman in the back. The gavel hit with a crack that made one woman flinch. As Cal stood, he felt every eye in the room settle on him. Not in judgment, in warning. One old man near the heater shook his head, barely perceptible. The sheriff didn't look away, didn't blink. At the clerk's table, a woman pushed the paperwork toward him like it burned her fingers. He signed with steady hands. Shadow pressed into his leg, solid and warm. He didn't believe in hauntings, but he knew the smell of fear when it thickened a room. Back outside, the storm had eased, snow falling soft now, almost polite. Cal loaded up on supplies at a hardware store that still used handwritten receipts. The man behind the counter, maybe in his 70s, leaned in when he rang Cal up. "You're the one who bought the Avery place, aren't you?" Cal nodded. "Should have gone to the sheriff's office instead of the auction, son. That land doesn't want company." Cal slid a packet of batteries into his bag. "I'm not company, I'm just tired." The man didn't smile. "Folks say old man Avery never left. Disappeared one fall. Truck still in the drive. Fire still warm in the hearth. That was 15 years ago. And that cabin's sat quiet ever since, like it's holding its breath." Cal didn't answer, didn't argue. He knew the kind of fear that settles in a place and refuses to die. He and Shadow reached the property by dusk. The road was little more than twin ruts through snow-drenched trees. The cabin came into view like a memory, half buried under snow, its roof bowed but unbroken. The porch sagged. The windows were black, dusted in frost. Cal stepped out first. Shadow stayed in the truck a beat longer. When he finally followed, he sniffed the air and froze. The fur on his back rose. "What is it?" Cal asked. Shadow didn't bark, didn't growl, just stared straight ahead. Past the porch, toward the heart of the cabin, toward something unseen. Inside, the air was colder than outside. A large single room with furniture frozen in time, a wool coat still hanging by the door, a book, face down, open on a small table, dust so thick it muffled sound, and the fireplace, built from river stones, floor to ceiling. Shadow moved to it like a magnet, stood inches away, tail stiff, muscles tight. He didn't whine, he didn't bark, but something in him had locked onto that hearth like it had called his name. Cal crouched beside him. His hand rested on the dog's back. Beneath the fur, muscle quivered. "You smell something?" Shadow gave a small, sharp exhale, then lifted his paw and scraped once at the stones. A message, clear as words. "This isn't just a fireplace?" Cal stood slowly, eyes locked on the stonework. Somewhere in his chest, something old and quiet began to stir. Not fear, recognition. He didn't know what was under that hearth, but his dog did. And Cal Becker had learned a long time ago, when a soldier's dog sounds the alarm, you listen, or you don't get a second chance. The storm hit harder than forecasted. By nightfall, the wind howled like a wounded animal, hurling snow against the cabin in waves. The walls creaked under the pressure. Cal had managed to get a fire going in the old stone hearth, its light flickering against log walls and casting uneven shadows across the room. The warmth was thin, but it beat freezing in the truck. Shadow wouldn't settle. Cal watched him from across the room, sitting on a blanket near the table, a tin cup of coffee in his hands. The dog had paced non-stop for nearly 20 minutes, circling the room in tight loops before zeroing in again, always to the fireplace. That fireplace had stood for decades, built from smooth river stones, solid and unmoving. But Shadow stood before it now, ears pinned, tail stiff, body low and tense. "Hey," Cal said, keeping his voice calm. "You gotta rest, buddy. We're not going anywhere tonight." Shadow didn't even glance at him. He stepped closer to the hearth and let out a low, guttural growl. Not loud, not theatrical, but real. Bone deep. It was the same sound Cal had heard once in Kandahar, right before Shadow had unearthed a hidden cache of explosives under a schoolhouse floor. Shadow raised one paw and began to scratch at the stone. Just once, then again, then faster, claws rasping against mortar. Cal stood. He set the cup down without taking his eyes off his dog. The growling didn't stop. "Okay," he said slowly. "What do you smell?" He crouched beside the fireplace, ran his hand over the stones where Shadow was focused. Cold, rough, solid. But Shadow wouldn't let up. His breathing was fast now, body coiled. At first Cal thought it could be a squirrel nest or a trapped animal. But there were no sounds, no scratching, no smell of decay, no scurry in the chimney. He reached for his flashlight and shone it close to the base. That's when he saw it. One of the stones, low, center of the hearth, rectangular instead of rounded, looked slightly out of place. Its edges didn't quite match the flow of the others, and the mortar around it, though skillfully disguised, was darker, smoother, like it had been sealed, not bonded. A false stone. He looked at Shadow. The dog's gaze was locked. Eyes wide, breath fast, chest rising and falling. Cal saw something in that stare he hadn't seen in years. Not fear. Warning. Cal ran his knuckles along the seam of the stone. Tapped it lightly. It didn't sound hollow, but there was a subtle give. A fraction of movement at the corner. "Jesus," he muttered. "You've been standing on top of this for 15 years, haven't you?" Shadow growled again, lower now, as if to confirm. Cal stood up, crossed the room to his gear, and pulled out the crowbar he'd used to pry open the truck bed earlier. He came back, set the bar at the base of the stone, and pressed down slowly. Nothing. He changed the angle, shifted slightly, put his weight into it. The stone groaned, not loudly, Just a hairline shift, the sound of pitch cracking at the edge. He paused, his breath loud in the room. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, it felt like the world had gone still. Shadow backed up half a step, watching the stone like it might bite. Cal pressed again. With a sharp pop and a grinding scrape, one side of the stone lifted an inch. Cold air rushed out. It didn't smell like damp earth. It smelled dry. Dead. He worked the bar around the edges, prying gently, carefully. Sweat trickled down his back, not from exertion but from the weight of whatever he was about to uncover. Finally, with both hands, he pulled. The stone was heavy, but it slid out in one solid piece and thudded onto the floor beside him. Below was a cavity. Rough cut, 4 feet deep, maybe 3 across. Lined in stone. Not a natural hole, a built cellar. And inside it, resting on a layer of dry earth, were 2 things. A military-grade green steel box, and a stack of notebooks tied with frayed twine. Shadow stopped growling. He stepped forward and sat down, eyes fixed on the hole. Calm now. Eerily so. Like the moment had passed. You knew, Cal whispered. He reached out, ran a hand along Shadow's back. You damn well knew. He grabbed the lantern and lowered it into the hole, letting the warm light wash over the contents. The box was sealed tight, the notebooks weathered but intact. No dust, no mold, untouched. 15 years, Cal thought. Someone had gone to great lengths to hide this. He didn't know what was inside. But his dog had found it. Not the wind, not a blueprint, not even Cal himself. The dog. Shadow rose, walked over to the hearth, and laid down beside the stone that once concealed the secret. Calm again. Steady. Guardian. Cal exhaled, the breath shaking from his chest. He stared into the dark opening, lantern flickering. Whatever had been buried here, someone had wanted it hidden forever. But Shadow had other plans. Cal waited until morning before opening the box. Not out of fear, but respect. He and Shadow had spent the rest of the night in silence, the lantern burning low, the snowstorm beating a steady rhythm against the walls. When he finally unlatched the steel case, his hands were steady. The interior was organized with military precision. No loose paper, no random clutter. Everything had its place. The top layer held a stack of leather-bound notebooks, their covers dark and worn, edges curled with time. Each one was labeled with a date in tidy block letters. Beneath them were folders, laminated maps, clear plastic bags filled with soil and water samples. Tucked inside the lid, a sealed envelope. Cal opened the first notebook. The handwriting was clean, deliberate. No flourishes, just clarity. November 2008. First entry. I don't know how long I can keep this up, but if they bury me, they're not burying this. The writer had signed his name. Eli Marcus. Cal paused. The name scratched at something in his memory. He reached for his thermos, poured the last of his coffee, and sat down across from Shadow. The dog watched him quietly, like he understood they'd just stepped into something much bigger than an old stone hearth. Eli Marcus, investigative journalist, disappeared 15 years ago. Cal remembered reading about it. A footnote in a Denver paper. Man goes missing. No signs of foul play. Cabin abandoned. Truck still in the driveway. A cold case buried under snow and time. He flipped the page. The entries began as personal notes, observations about the land, the air, the isolation. Then they changed. They started buying up the valley 5 years ago. Geoterra Resources. Quiet at first. Anonymous LLCs, handshake deals. The older ranchers took the checks. The rest they pressured. Then came the water. Cal leaned forward, turning the pages. Faster now. Each entry was denser, more frantic. Discolored wells. Dead trout in Mill Creek. livestock miscarriages. Marcus had collected it all. Dates, names, test results. He had water tested independently, pages of data attached in sleeves. The chemical readings were off the charts. Heavy metals, solvents, arsenic. He wasn't guessing. He was proving it. Shadow stood suddenly, his head snapping towards the window. He let out a single sharp bark. Cal was on his feet in an instant, the notebook falling shut. He moved to the window, pulled back the curtain. Nothing but trees and snow. Shadow growled low, then settled again. Just the wind. Or maybe something deeper, something remembered. Cal exhaled slowly and sat back down. His heart was pounding, not from fear, but the sense that every breath now mattered more than it had the day before. Eli's notes didn't stop with environmental data. They shifted again. They know I'm digging. I think they got someone at the county office. My permits are disappearing. I got a notice today about a chimney code violation. My chimney's been here since '68. Then a tax reassessment. Then the land registry said my boundaries were unclear. They're not trying to kill me. They're trying to crush me under paper. That's when Cal understood. Eli hadn't just uncovered a scandal. He'd stepped into a machine. Geoterra wasn't operating alone. They had help. The county, the zoning office, maybe even law enforcement. The perfect clean method. No bullets, no bodies. Just silence and lost paperwork. Cal looked down at Shadow. You dragged me out of bed for a dead man's war. Shadow blinked, as if to say, not dead, just waiting. Cal flipped through more pages. The last entry was different. Slanted. A rushed hand. Someone was in the cabin last night. Didn't see them. But I know. I hid the box. If they find it, everything's gone. If they don't, maybe someone else will. The date was October 12th, 2009. That was the day Eli Marcus vanished. Cal sat back, spine cold. He looked at the open cavity beneath the fireplace. The notebooks, the bagged samples, the envelope. He opened it. Inside was a photograph, a satellite image of the valley. Red dots marked specific points, springs, streams, small lakes, dozens of them, each one labeled, each one poisoned. Cal spread the map across the table. He saw it now. The pattern. A slow ring, closing in on something. No, not something. Someone. They hadn't just been after water rights. They were burying the damage before it reached the edge of town, before it reached the people. Shadow let out a low rumble again, this time less urgent. He walked toward the table and sat, his eyes fixed on Cal. This wasn't coincidence. It wasn't chance. The cabin wasn't a haunted relic waiting to rot. It was a message in a bottle. And Shadow had been the one to crack it open. Cal leaned forward, his fingers pressed against the map. He didn't believe in ghosts. But he believed in unfinished business. And Eli Marcus had left behind a war still worth fighting. The way the wind moved through the pines had a different tone that morning. It carried a weight, a deliberate hush, like someone had pulled a curtain across the world. Cal was awake before dawn, boots already laced, coffee gone cold in the pot. He had spent the night cross-referencing Eli Marcus's notes, choosing which pages to copy and which to bury again. Shadow lay beside the hearth like a sheaf of smoke, ears twitching at every creak in the logs. Sound mattered out here. It had always mattered. Quiet could be a friend, and quiet could be a lie. Cal listened to the grove and decided the grove was lying. A truck pulled up the drive with a diesel gruff that cut through the trees. The kind of truck you heard before you saw it and knew without asking who it belonged to. Cal walked to the door and opened it a crack. Snow clung to the window frames in small, stubborn drifts. The man who stepped out of the truck wore a sheriff's winter coat that looked newer than the rest of the county combined. His hat was pulled low, and there was a weathered badge pinned to his chest. He moved with the clumsy confidence of a man who had spent too long behind desks and not enough time listening to the woods. Sheriff Doyle called up the walk in a voice meant to be casual. He was a broad-shouldered man, late 50s maybe, face like a map of winters and small-town compromises. His eyes were the color of river mud, patient and dull until they weren't. "Morning," he said. "Thought I'd check up on the new owner." Cal opened the door wide enough to let the cold back in. Shadow rose and walked to the doorway. He did not put his nose up to sniff. He did not wag. He stood like a sentinel, a single line of fur and muscle between the man in the badge and the man who owned the cabin. Doyle studied the dog the way some men studied bar stools. "You got yourself a good dog," he said. "Good ones cost more than a cabin these days." Cal kept his answer short. He didn't trust the tone. "What brings you out this far, Sheriff?" "Just making rounds," Doyle said. "Saw the deed went through. Figured I'd introduce myself. Make sure you're not about to freeze to death out here." The small talk was a screen door. Cal watched the way Doyle's glance moved fast and precise. He noticed the curve of the sheriff's mouth when he said the word deed, the way his left hand rested near the radio on his belt. He noticed the clean cut on Doyle's knuckle and the faint stain at the edge of his cuff, as if he had been handling something raw. "You been in this place long?" Doyle asked, looking past Cal at the hearth. "Long enough to know it needs work," Cal said. Doyle stepped inside as if invited, boots sucking up snow. He let the warmth wash him, but his eyes didn't soften. He circled, polite and slow, hands in pockets, appearance of a man trying to appear uninterested. He ran his fingers along the mantel, touched the books, glanced at the notebooks stacked on the table. "Quiet here," he observed. "Probably for a reason." Cal's jaw tightened. He watched Shadow. The dog's ears were pricked now, and the skin along his neck rose. He didn't sound the alarm. He didn't bark. But the dog's body spoke in old animal language. Shadow's tail brushed the floor once, twice, like a metronome. It was not approval. Doyle smiled as if reading some private joke. "People come and people go with their curiosities," he said. "Some things are better left sleeping. You might do yourself a favor and leave certain stones unturned." That was the first threat, thin as fog but heavy as iron. It came wrapped in the language of small towns and law. Cal's hand found the edge of the table. He could have told the sheriff to leave. He could have asked why a county official was suddenly concerned with old tax lots. Instead, he measured his words like a fuse. "I bought the place. I have the deed. If there's trouble, I'll handle it," he said. Doyle's grin narrowed. "That's for some folks to decide," he said. "There are interests in this valley bigger than most men's nerves. Be careful, Cal. Not everyone plays fair." He left as quietly as he'd come, stepping back into the cold like he had never stepped in at all. His truck started with the same low growl and vanished down the track. For a long minute, the only sound was the crackle of the embers. Shadow stayed by the door, eyes fixed on the place the truck had stood until the trees closed the road off like a hand. Cal would have told himself he was done with worry, but he checked the truck anyway. Habit kept him moving. He found the spare, scrawled box of tools. He handed Shadow the leash and walked out between the pines, the snow bright underfoot. He crawled under the truck, hands numb, scraping his knuckles against ice and rust. Something snagged on his glove. The rear passenger side tire was sliced in a clean, deliberate incision. Not a nail, not a puncture by accident. A thin, precise cut that would leak slow and mean. Someone had slit his tire. The cut was small enough to be almost courteous, the kind that whispers you are being watched rather than screamed at. It was a message written in rubber and cold metal. "Get out while you can, or be stranded when we need you gone." Cal felt some old muscle memory awaken, a shape of anger he had learned to harness and not spill. He thought of Sheriff Doyle's polite words and the quick way he'd skirted the moral edge. He thought of the clean cuff with the stain. He thought of the tidy, targeted way the tire had been wounded. Shadow nudged his hand with a warm nose, look and then push, a canine insistence that calmed the rising temper. The dog's eyes held something like warning, but also a certainty that this was a human problem, one that needed human hands and human heads. "We're not alone out here," Cal said to Shadow, and the dog answered by resting his head on Cal's knee, steady and sure. Back inside the cabin, Cal sealed the wheel's slow leak with a patch and set his mind. He could drive into town, get a replacement, or he could sit and wait to see who else came looking in person. The decision felt less strategic than moral. If there were men who would slit a tire as a courtesy, they would not hesitate to slit a life if it suited them. He thought of Eli Marcus bent over his notebooks, listing names and coordinates. He thought of families with poisoned wells. He thought of a tiny map of red dots marking places people drank from and paid the price. Shadow shifted and stood. He walked to the hearth where the false stone lay like a wound in the floor and put his nose back to the seam. He made no sound. He did not need to. In the dog's calm there was an oath, a promise. "I stand, even if the world would have you fall." Outside, the forest held its breath. Inside, a sheriff had offered a warning. Someone had left a blade on a road. The cabin, like a living thing, drew the breath in and exhaled. Cal set the lantern on the table and spread Eli's map under its light. He looked at Shadow, and then at the names scrawled in the margins. The work had begun to feel less like an idle curiosity and more like a duty. If they came with knives and trucks, he would meet them with warning shots and stories. If they came with legal papers and smiling faces, he would meet them with documents and witnesses. Either way, he would be ready. Shadow sat like a statue, ready to move at the slightest command. The cabin had stopped being a purchase. It was an inheritance of a fight. And the first claim on that fight had already strained its muscles. The question now was how far the county's reach went, and whether a dog and a man could hold the line long enough for truth to find a voice. The days blurred. Cal moved through them like a man rebuilding a house that had never truly belonged to him. The cabin was still silent, still cold, but it no longer felt abandoned. It felt watched. He had scanned, copied, and sorted over 200 pages of Eli Marcus's notes, storing duplicates in waterproof bags and sealing the rest back under the hearth. The air inside the cabin had taken on a metallic weight, like the place itself was holding its breath again. Shadow had changed, too. He slept lighter, ate slower. His body always angled toward the nearest door or window, nose twitching, ears tuned like radar. Then came the first sign. It was late afternoon. Cal had stepped outside to split firewood. Shadow stood near the edge of the clearing, tail stiff, body low, fixed on something beyond the tree line. Cal followed the dog's gaze. Nothing. Just pine. Dense. Still. But he knew that stillness. It was the kind that came with breath you couldn't hear and eyes that didn't blink. Cal went inside, retrieved the binoculars, and pressed against the doorframe, keeping the motion slow. He scanned the forest edge where Shadow had locked in. It took him a full 2 minutes. Then a flash of something not made by nature. A pale shape just behind the tree line. A glint, glass, a lens. Then it vanished, swallowed by branches. Cal didn't chase. That would have been a mistake. Whoever was watching knew how to disappear. This wasn't a curious hiker. This was a professional. Back inside, he slid the extra copy of the map into a heavy-duty pouch and tucked it under the floorboards near the bed. He took out the documents he hadn't yet copied, including Eli's final notes, and spread them across the table under lamplight. The shadows on the wall flickered, Wind battered the glass. Night fell hard. And then came the noise. It was soft at first, barely registering beneath the groan of the storm. A scrape, not from wind or tree, metal on wood. Deliberate. Slow. Shadow's head shot up from the floor. He was on his feet in one breath, body taut, eyes locked on the door. The latch rattled. Cal moved fast, lantern off, rifle up. He pulled Shadow behind the bed and knelt, his breath steady. His heart wasn't. The door creaked open just a fraction, just enough for a silhouette to appear, broad, armed, gloved. Then the shape hesitated. Even in the dark, something had stopped him. Shadow. The dog had stepped forward into the open space between Cal and the door. He didn't bark, didn't charge. He growled, low and savage, the kind of sound that reminded something in the human brain to turn and run. The figure hesitated. A second passed. Then Cal saw the flicker of motion. The man's hand moved, fast, toward his belt, the shape of a weapon. Cal didn't wait. He fired. The shot cracked through the cabin like a thunderclap. The muzzle flash lit the man's face for a split second. Ski mask, wide eyes, panic. He stumbled back. Shadow lunged, his body a blur of grey muscle. He slammed into the intruder's legs, hard enough to send the man tumbling backward off the porch. Cal was up and moving. He kicked the door fully open and stepped out into the snow, rifle still raised. Nothing. Just the storm. The man was gone. But the message was loud. No more warning shots, no more flat tires. They were done playing. Back inside, Cal bolted the door and reinforced it with a heavy beam from the pile he had planned to use for repairs. Shadow circled the room once, then returned to his post near the hearth, his breath quick, eyes still alert. Cal poured water from the kettle and splashed it across his face. His hands shook. He wasn't scared of dying. He'd made peace with that a long time ago. What he was scared of was letting the truth go with him. He grabbed the burner phone from his bag and powered it up. The signal was weak but there. He typed fast. A message to the only man he trusted with this kind of fire. Lenny, it's Cal. I have something. Not safe to explain. Need to meet. You know where. Burn this phone after you get this. He hit send. Then he dropped the phone into the fireplace and watched it curl into ash. Shadow sat near him, ears still twitching. They're not coming to scare us anymore, Cal said. Shadow blinked once. They're coming to bury it. The air felt different now, not because of the cold or the violence or the memory of a man's boot on the threshold. It was different because they had crossed a line. Shadow had drawn it. With his body, with his growl, with the choice to stand between his person and the threat. Cal didn't need more time. He needed one clean shot. Get the truth out, before they came back with more than fear, before they came back with fire. The snow hadn't stopped. If anything, it had thickened into something alive, gnawing at visibility, clawing down trees, howling through the timber like it was hunting. But Cal Becker moved through it anyway, hunched inside his heavy coat, boots cracking ice and frost underfoot, the wind carving raw lines across his cheeks. Shadow trotted just ahead of him, a silent wraith in the storm. No leash, no commands. He didn't need them. He knew the stakes. They reached the truck just before midnight. It had taken Cal 3 days to plan this exfil, roots, supplies, contingency bags. He'd packed only what mattered. Copies of Eli Marcus's original notes, the water sample reports, the topographic map marked with red-ringed poisoning sites. Enough truth to bury every lie built over that valley. And he knew exactly who to give it to. Lenny Tran. They'd served together in Afghanistan, 2 different skill sets, but the same fire in the gut. Lenny traded his rifle for a recorder when the war ended. Now he ran deep-dive exposés for a Denver paper that still bled ink and printed truth. If there was one person who wouldn't flinch, who wouldn't get bought off or scared silent. It was Lenny. Cal started the engine and let it rumble while Shadow jumped into the passenger seat, body caked in snow, eyes wide and unblinking. He stared into the tree line like he expected movement. Cal followed his gaze. Nothing. But that didn't mean no one was out there. He pulled out onto the road. The tires fought the snowpack like a boat pushing upriver. Every mile felt stolen. But the deeper he drove into the back country, the more the wind screamed behind him, as if trying to pull him back. It took him 2 hours to reach the highway, another 3 before the lights of Denver cut through the dark. He didn't stop at gas stations. He didn't make phone calls. He'd already memorized every license plate behind him. No tails. Not yet. At 5:03 a.m., he parked behind a shuttered print shop on Larimer Street. Shadow stayed in the cab. Cal walked to the back door of the cafe next to the alley and knocked 3 times, then once more. The lock clicked. Lenny opened the door. No questions asked. He looked older than Cal remembered. Hair flecked with grey, eyes behind black-rimmed glasses just as sharp as they'd been 20 years ago. He wore a worn Columbia jacket and jeans that hadn't seen a press since the Bush administration. "You look like hell," Lenny said. "You always did have a way with words." Cal replied. He handed over the bag. Lenny didn't open it. He just held it against his chest like something sacred. "Is this what I think it is?" Cal nodded. "And more. There's names, there's data, there's enough to crack the damn rock open." "And what's your part?" "Mine's just making sure you get it, and making sure they don't stop you." They stood there for a beat. A silence born from war, not distance. "Same deal as always?" Lenny asked. "Same deal," Cal said. "If I don't check in by 0600, you dump the file and light the whole valley on fire. Feds only, not local, not state, and definitely not the sheriff's office." "Understood. You coming with me?" "Can't. I need to go back." Lenny looked at him like he was trying to read a classified document through a brick wall. "This isn't a one-man job anymore, Cal. You know that, right? I'm not alone." Lenny glanced past Cal and saw the grey silhouette in the truck. He nodded. "Fair point." Cal turned to go. "Hey," Lenny called after him. "You sure you want to go back in?" "I never left," Cal said, and disappeared into the storm. The drive back was harder. The wind had turned, trees bent in protest, and the snow now came in tight spirals that danced in the headlights like ghosts. Shadow stayed curled in the passenger seat, head low, muscles tense. They pulled into the clearing just as first light pushed against the horizon. Barely a glow, more like a bruise than a sunrise. Cal shut off the engine and sat in silence. Shadow whined low. "Yeah, me too," Cal whispered. The cabin stood still, untouched, but something about it felt different. Cal scanned the tree line. Every branch looked like it could hide a barrel. Every window felt like a target. He walked the perimeter twice, Shadow flanking him step for step. No footprints, no new disturbances. But Cal didn't relax. He wasn't back to live. He was back to hold the line. Inside, the fire was dead. The air had that damp, cold rot again. He unpacked only what he needed: ammo, water, 2 blankets. One for him, one for the dog. Then he took out the last thing in his pack. A burner phone, brand new, charged, no SIM. He set it on the table and stared at it. That phone was his lifeline. If it rang at 6 a.m. and he didn't answer, the fuse was lit. He didn't feel fear. Not yet. What he felt was clarity. Shadow circled the room once, then returned to the hearth. He sat. Didn't move. His eyes met Cal's as if to say, "We stay." Cal nodded. "We hold." Outside, the wind screamed louder. Inside, the truth waited, and time, now, had a countdown. The storm made everything sound wrong. Wind screamed down the ridge like something wounded. Snow hammered the roof in thick bursts. Logs in the fireplace cracked and spit, but even the fire's warmth felt hollow, like it knew what was coming. Cal sat near the window, rifle across his lap, boots planted, breath slow. Shadow lay beside the door, head up, ears tuned like satellite dishes. His tail twitched, stiff, uneasy. Then he growled, low, short, deadly. Cal was on his feet before the second breath. "Where?" he whispered. Shadow didn't move, just turned his head slowly, toward the back of the cabin. The kitchen window, a flicker of movement, a faint crunch of snow just outside. Cal killed the lights. The cabin dropped into full dark. Then, like a match strike, everything exploded. The window shattered inward. A body tumbled through, black gear, black mask, black intent. Another figure followed from the side door. Cal raised the rifle, squeezed. The shot punched through the silence. The first man dropped, screaming, holding his thigh. Shadow launched. He slammed into the second intruder like a missile, teeth locking onto the man's forearm with bone-snapping force. The man shrieked, stumbled backward, slamming against the wall. Shadow didn't let go. Cal moved like muscle memory, 1 step, 2. A second shot dropped the second man, just as Shadow yanked his arm sideways, dislocating it with a pop. Then came the scent. Gasoline. Heavy. Close. Cal turned, too late. A bottle crashed through the front window, flames chasing it. The fire hit the cabin floor and spread like it had been waiting. "Shadow!" he yelled. The dog bolted toward him just as the curtains went up in flame. Heat surged. Smoke rolled low across the ceiling. The back wall was burning. Fast. They had minutes, maybe less. Cal grabbed the duffel by the door, not the one with evidence, the one with weapons. He slung the strap over his shoulder and kicked the door open. Wind blasted in, freezing and brutal. But he didn't step outside. He saw him. Silas Kane. Standing 20 feet away, no mask, no helmet. Just a long black coat flapping in the wind, and 2 men with rifles behind him. "You should have stayed dead, Becker," Kane called out. Cal stepped into the snow, Shadow at his heel. "Funny, that's what I thought about you." Kane smirked. "You don't have what you think you do. I sent it already." Kane's face shifted, just for a moment, a crack in the glass. "That's so," he said. "Then I guess burning you is just for fun." He raised his hand. The man to his right aimed. Cal dove sideways just as the shot rang out. Snow exploded where his chest had been. He fired back, short, controlled bursts. 1 shot caught the rifleman's shoulder. He dropped. Then came the silence. A beat. And then Shadow moved. He cut left, looping through trees like a shadow within shadows. Cal kept his eyes on Kane. "What happened to you, Silas?" Cal asked, buying time. "You used to believe in something." "I still do," Kane said coldly. "Profit." Behind him, Shadow closed in. Kane's other guard turned, too late. A blur of fur and fury hit him low, sending them both into the snow. Screams echoed off the trees. Kane panicked. He stepped back, raised. A pistol, aimed it at Shadow. Cal fired. The round hit Kane's hand, spinning the weapon from his grip. He howled and stumbled backward. Shadow snarled and lunged again, but Cal whistled sharp. "Leave him!" Shadow froze, chest heaving, jaws flecked with blood. Kane fell to his knees, clutching his hand. "Who did you send it to?" He gasped. "You'll find out tomorrow," Cal said. "So will the rest of the world." Behind them, the cabin crackled. Flames danced through every window. The roof groaned under heat and collapse. Cal turned away from Kane and walked into the trees. Shadow followed, limping but proud. Behind them, Kane screamed into the storm. But no one answered. The fire did its work, and somewhere far away a phone was ringing toward dawn. The flames roared behind them. Snow swirled like ash. And in that moment of silence, with the cold biting through Cal's jacket and blood still drying on Shadow's fur, Silas Kane reached again. His left hand, still steady despite the shredded knuckles, moved slowly toward the pistol buried under his coat. Cal saw it. So did Shadow. "I wouldn't," Cal warned, voice low. "You won't get a second shot." But Kane's eyes were wild now, pupils small, lips pale. The confidence was gone, burned up with the cabin. All that remained was desperation. He lunged for it. Shadow growled deep and coiled to strike. And then they heard it. A sound that didn't belong to storm or fire or fury. Whop, whop, whop! The rhythmic thud of rotor blades cutting through mountain air. Kane froze, arm half outstretched. He turned toward the tree line. Cal exhaled. Finally. "Guess Lenny made the call," he muttered. From above the pines, a black helicopter emerged, low, fast, beam lights piercing the blizzard haze. Seconds later, red and blue lights followed, winding through the snowy pass like a slow-moving serpent. State police SUVs, tactical units, local deputies, the forest lit up like a crime scene. "Drop the weapon!" a voice barked from a loudspeaker overhead. Cal raised both arms. Shadow sat at his side, tail still, eyes sharp. Kane didn't move. Then, against all logic, he did the stupid thing. He drew. Instant chaos. The FBI team repelled from the chopper in synchronized descent. Ground agents swarmed from the snowbanks with rifles drawn. Kane was on the ground in 3 seconds, pinned and screaming. 2 of his remaining men tried to run. Didn't make it 5 feet. Shadow stood guard over Cal like a monument. One agent raised his weapon towards the dog but stopped short when Cal called out, "He's with me." A beat, then a nod. The lead FBI agent approached, tall, clean-shaven, no nonsense. "Calvin Becker?" he asked. Cal didn't answer immediately. He looked back at the burning cabin. The smoke curled like a ghost above the ridge. "Yeah," he finally said. "That's me. You're lucky your friend didn't wait." Cal nodded. "I told him if I didn't check in. By dawn." "You didn't." They both looked back toward Kane, who was now being zip-tied and loaded into the back of a transport. "You have any idea what this is going to blow open?" the agent said. Cal almost smiled. "I do." A deputy jogged up from the wreckage. "Sir, the fire's collapsed the roof. We won't get much from what's left." Cal looked at the man, then past him, to the far corner of the rubble where the hearthstones still stood, blackened but unbroken. He pointed. "Try under the hearth. I left a fireproof case sealed in the floor. Names, transfers, offshore ledgers, everything." The agent's brow rose. "You serious?" "I don't joke with the dead." The team moved fast. 2 officers with thermal scanners, a third with an axe. Within minutes, they pried open the cracked stone base and pulled up the metal hatch, black from smoke but intact. Inside, exactly what Cal said. Sealed drive, handwritten logs, even a voice recorder, evidence, real, undeniable. "Jesus," one of them whispered. The agent looked back at Cal. "You could have walked away." "Thought about it," Cal said, but then this guy showed up. He gestured at Shadow. The German shepherd sat calmly now, eyes never leaving Kane's transport. The wind fluttered through his coat. His chest rose and fell, slow, measured. "He barked once," Cal added. That was enough. The agent followed Cal's gaze, looked at the dog, then back. "You're lucky he did." Cal's jaw tightened. "No, I'm just not stupid enough to ignore him." They both looked out toward the horizon. Sunlight began to pierce the edge of the storm. Snow still fell, but softer now, like the mountain was finally exhaling. Shadow stood, stretched, then leaned against Cal's leg. "I'm tired," Cal said. "You're about to be famous," the agent replied. Cal didn't smile. He just watched the last of the flames die down. I'd rather just be left alone. He said, "Me and the dog." The agent nodded. "We'll do what we can." But they both knew the world was about to come knocking. And Shadow? He just sat down again, right at Cal's heel, like always, still watching, still guarding. It didn't hit the front page. It took over the front page. Corporate whistleblower exposes deep state collusion. Veteran and canine reveal hidden network of federal corruption. He didn't bark for food, he barked for the truth. The headlines stretched coast to coast. From Washington Post editorials to small-town radio blurbs, the story of Calvin Becker, the recluse with the military past, and a ghost dog named Shadow, became the spine of a nationwide reckoning. What started with a burned-down cabin in the Montana backcountry had unraveled a criminal web that reached into procurement contracts, defense consulting firms, even congressional aides. Silas Kane's arrest had triggered a domino effect. Over 40 federal indictments followed. Hearings filled C-SPAN airtime. Kane's smug testimony collapsed under the weight of hard evidence, and one particular audio recording, hidden under a mountain hearth, now played on every major news outlet. A clipped voice. Cold. Transactional. "How many do we move off books?" A pause. "Does it matter? They signed the papers. No one's coming back." Cal watched that part once. Only once. Afterward, he unplugged the TV and turned it to face the wall. He hadn't spoken publicly. No interviews, no statement. When reporters showed up, he shut the door. When a senator called to offer a medal, he hung up. He didn't want a podium. He wanted quiet. Shadow, on the other hand, got famous. The VA reached out after hearing about the dog's instincts, his discipline, his loyalty under fire. Turns out the agency had quietly been building a pilot therapy unit, pairing rescue-trained dogs with veterans struggling with PTSD. They asked if Shadow could help. Cal asked Shadow, and Shadow walked over, sat by the woman's chair, and laid his head on her knee. The woman was shaking when she arrived. She was crying when she left, but not in the same way. So Cal agreed. Shadow would do the work. Cal would just stay close. They moved back to the ridge 2 months later. The land had changed. Charred trees stood like skeletons, but the roots were still there. Beneath the ash, life pushed through. Grass, shoots, even wildflowers. Nature didn't care what burned, it only cared what remained. And Cal had rebuilt, not a replica of the old cabin. This one had wide windows, open air, a stone porch and a metal roof that gleamed in the sun. Same footprint, same soul, but new bones. On the mantel sat only one object, a small framed plaque. It read in black steel letters, "He didn't bark for food. He barked for the truth." Shadow had a bed by the fire. He rarely used it. He preferred lying on the porch, watching the wind move through the trees, ears twitching at sounds no human noticed. Every few weeks, a visitor would come. A vet, a widow, sometimes just someone with tired eyes. And Shadow would meet them, sit beside them and let them cry. He never flinched, never left early, and they always left better. One afternoon, Lenny stopped by. He carried a six-pack and a file folder. "You were right," he said, cracking a beer. "Kane was just the top layer." Cal didn't look up from where he was chopping firewood. "Told you. They're going to indict the regional director of veteran infrastructure. 3 other contractors flipped." Cal tossed another log onto the pile. "Let them rot." Lenny sat on the steps, took a long pull from his drink. "You know, you could probably write a book. Hell, even get a Netflix deal." Cal shook his head. "I'm not interested in being anyone's cautionary tale." "You're not. You're the warning before the mistake." Cal smiled, barely. Lenny pulled a small photo from the folder. It was from the night of the takedown. Shadow, standing tall, ears back, in front of the burning cabin, eyes locked on the camera. "They want to name the canine therapy program after him," Lenny said. Cal took the photo, looked at it for a long time. Only if they remember he's not a mascot, he said. He's a soldier. Lenny nodded. They will. That night, as the sun dipped behind the trees, Cal stood on the porch, coffee in hand, Shadow sitting beside him. The wind was quiet. The world, for once, didn't feel like it was hunting him. He glanced down. You know what bothers me most? He asked. Shadow tilted his head. They always thought I was running away. He looked out into the darkening forest. But I wasn't. I was just waiting for someone to listen. Shadow pressed his head gently into Cal's hip. No bark, just quiet agreement. It was the kind of fall morning Montana does best, cold air warming over golden fields, the sky clean and unforgiving. The porch boards creaked under small boots as a dozen middle school kids stepped carefully across the gravel path. Some clutched notebooks, others whispered to each other. One girl kept glancing towards the tree line, hoping to catch a glimpse of something wild. Cal stood near the cabin gate, hands in his jacket pockets. His beard had grown in silver streaks since the trial, but his eyes hadn't aged. Still sharp, still tired, still watching. Shadow sat by his side, tail curled over his front paws, eyes alert. Not tense, but aware. He didn't move as the kids gathered. He didn't need to. His presence alone was a kind of gravity. A woman from the VA program, now wearing a clean green vest with "Dogs That Found the Truth" stitched across the back, clapped her hands to quiet the group. This, she said, is Shadow, and that's Calvin Becker, the man who taught us that silence isn't always peace. One of the boys, maybe 10 years old, raised his hand without waiting to be called. Do dogs really know when something's wrong? He asked, like, before people do? Cal didn't speak right away. He looked down at Shadow. The dog met his eyes. That same knowing calm, that stillness that once stopped Cal from pulling a trigger, that had led him back into a cabin while it burned, that had stood guard not just over land, but over truth. Then Cal turned, pointed to the wooden sign mounted above the door. Black letters, burned into the grain. He didn't bark for food, Cal said. He barked for the truth. The boy blinked. He looked at Shadow with new eyes. A girl beside him tugged at her sleeve. What truth? She whispered. Cal didn't answer. He didn't need to. The kids didn't know the full story. Not the bodies, not the buried data, not the night Cal and Shadow came out of the trees with fire behind them and silence ahead. But somehow they understood the part that mattered. That sometimes the world doesn't fall apart. With noise, it falls apart in quiet. That sometimes it takes a dog to notice. The group continued the tour. The VA worker explained how the program pairs retired service dogs with veterans, survivors, and whistleblowers who no longer trust their own instincts. Dogs like Shadow helped them feel again, listen again, trust again. At the end of the path, the group stopped by a small fenced field where new dogs trained. Some barked at targets, others simply walked beside handlers in silence. Not obeying, partnering. A boy knelt at the edge of the fence. A shepherd pup came trotting up, tail wagging like it hadn't seen a bad day in its life. What's his name? He asked. Truth, said the trainer. She was born the night Shadow brought down the last of the ring. Back on the porch, Cal sat with Shadow, watching the clouds shift over the ridgeline. Lenny had asked him once, off the record, why he came back to the land that nearly killed him. Cal had said, because if you run from the wound, you miss the healing. Shadow lay beside him now, eyes half-lidded but ears still twitching. Always listening, always ready. Cal reached down, scratched behind his ear. Still watching, huh? Shadow didn't move, didn't need to. Some truths don't bark anymore. They just stand watch. As the last of the kids left, one turned around, looked up at the porch, and waved. Shadow lifted his head slightly, a flick of recognition, and in that second there was no cabin, no trial, no past, just a boy, a question, and a dog that had outlived lies. Somewhere deep in the trees a hawk cried. Wind moved through pine needles like whispers. Cal stood up, stretched, and looked out over the land they rebuilt. Not perfect, not clean, but honest. And as the screen faded to black, a single question hung in the air. What's your story with a loyal pet? If you believe dogs see deeper than we do, if you've ever been saved by 4 paws and a look that said, "I'm here," then this is your story too. Support our mission. Share the truth. Honor the ones who never stopped guarding. Subscribe to German Shepherd, where loyalty lives on.